Thank you, Cindy, and thank you to the amazing John O'Donoghue. It's very hard to back those words with anything of substance. It is a delight to be here, and so I'm just going to give you a sort of like a brief taste of what Syntropic Enterprise is all about. And to do that, I really need to start with what it is and why this has become my life's work. So as Cindy mentioned, I was deeply affected by Bucky Fuller from my mid-20s. And I had the privilege of spending time, not with him, unfortunately, but with a group of people, including Amy Edmondson, who was his protege for the last 3 years of his life, studying his work intensely. And that meant also that we built models, because Bucky wasn't a theoretical person, he was a model builder. And the point of his life was to understand why humans were in universe and what we were here to do. And he also wanted to understand the laws of universe that he called generalized principles, true in all cases. And what he did in his life was he applied those laws to the built environment. So he created incredible models from a very, from 1927 that demonstrated these laws. He was the creator of the geodesic dome, which still to this day is the most economical way to hold space or cover, include space without a single strut. And the bigger the geodesic dome, the more stable it is. So you could literally put a geodesic dome over the whole of Manhattan and change the environment if you needed to. But anyway, so my work has always been about how do we apply those generalized principles, true in all cases, to how we do enterprise design and human engagement and human coordination. Because Bucky also taught me that most of our human constructed models, the way we do economy, our monetary systems, our governance systems, our legal enterprise systems, the structures of our legal enterprises are human constructed and completely and absolutely ignore the laws of universe, the laws of nature, essentially, in their design. And so this impulse of humans to impose upon things that are antithetical or entropic to nature's systems is something that I've explored most of my life. And so how this sort of manifested for me was through the art of convening. And I've always been someone who has loved to convene people together. And around a central purpose that people really cared about, because the founding sort of belief is that the world is filled mostly with good people and good people who really want to come together around a purpose that they care about and do so in a way that changes how we live and be as humanity. And I also believe that most of us have aspiration for a more beautiful world and a world with a future. But how do we do that? And that is the question. And so over a lifetime of exploring how to bring people together, I had 30 years of experimentation of it falling into a messy human heap. And I'm sure if any of you have any experience of coming together with groups, even family groups, the messy human heap is something that you're familiar with. So in 2015, I was inspired to create an event in my local community called Big Blue Sky. And the purpose was to bring multi-stakeholders of our community together to co-create the future of our city. And what I did, it was a very inspired project. And what I did was I created this architecture of the convening of the enterprise, which we call the Trust Manifesto. And we actually put it into the legal trust of Big Blue Sky. And so it was a requisite for anybody who was part of the active participation of Big Blue Sky to read the trust and complete the exercise to cross a threshold, to refer to the beautiful poem of John O'Donoghue, with sovereign choice, but agreeing that if we were going to be creating this event, that this was the way that we were going to work together and hold each other together. And that enabled a group of 12 complete strangers from highly diverse backgrounds over the period of 6 months to co-create a world-class event without a single human upset and entirely self-managed. And if you had been there as a participant in that event, you would have walked into the room and sensed that there was something magical happening here, because it's the invisible spaces, it's the weightless and immeasurable spaces, and how that's held together that creates these extraordinary experiences for humans. And of course, Bucky called love metaphysical gravity. And so in the world that we have right now, of course, part of what we do in enterprise design is we have systems of how we account for things. And almost entirely our accounting mechanisms reduce everything to one single metric, which is the metric of money. And so part of what we do in Syntropic World is we account for value in a minimum of 6 domains of input. And some of those inputs are things like love and care and compassion, warm data type of inputs. And so we value those as human contribution. In post the event of 2015, Big Blue Sky, I went into a very dark existential crisis from a number of reasons. And on emerging from that, I made a decision that the rest of my life I was going to focus, rather than trying to change the deck chairs on a Titanic, I was going to focus on the world that we can create. And so and because I love enterprise, which literally means endeavor, human engagement. So enterprise is anything from a community group to 2 people working together, to a large multinational, to a not-for-profit, anything where people come together as an enterprise. But I knew that we had to call this type of enterprise for a world with a future something different, because social enterprise has been co-opted and doesn't fully explain the type of enterprise that we're aiming to support and see as the enterprise of the future. And so I went back to Bucky's books, and of course he had talked for years about the entropic nature of universe, but he had always argued that entropy, which is the second law of thermodynamics, which says that we are in a disintegrating universe, he had always argued that that was actually there was this opposite force. Because one of the generalized principles is unity is plural of minimum 2. And so to entropy, we have syntropy. And syntropy literally means towards a higher order for an eternally regenerative universe. And so in short, in code, syntropy means leaving everything better, everything. And it is a complete re-examination of how we do enterprise, create enterprise. And the term syntropic enterprise we placed in the Creative Commons, because I didn't want to own it and I didn't want anyone else to own it. I wanted it to be a commons, as Jim mentioned earlier. It's important that we reanimate the commons, and so the space that we're holding in Syntropic World is that Syntropic enterprise becomes the way we do business, not the far exception. But within that, there's a re-examination of every single assumption and every system that we have. And it is really intrinsically motivated by one of Bucky's quotes, which is, don't try and change the existing system. Build new models that make the existing obsolete. And so it is towards that we've turned our attention. And rather than fumbling around with what's not working, it's how do we actually create and design what will work. And of course, along that, acknowledging that we will be making mistakes, But if we are really paying attention to laws of nature, the laws of the universe that have been in existence well before humans, if we really pay attention to that, and always be sure that we're in partnership with laws of universe versus trying to dominate, then our course correction should be much easier. So I wanted to give you just a little bit of a sort of background, and then some of the key components that we work on within Syntropic Enterprise are things such as what we call synergistic accounting, which is based on Bucky's 12 degrees of freedom, but essentially looking at how we honor and respect value in 6 domains of input and 6 domains of output. And the 6 is built around geometry, which was essentially geometry is the study of relationships, but a core part of Bucky's work. And so when people, and Cindy referred to the threshold crossing, one of the other key elements that we have within the work that we teach around how to create a syntropic enterprise is the architecture that says, if you're part of this enterprise, then this is what we agree to. And so in our sort of like model, we're using a simple biological structure, which is the cell membrane. And the reason that we do this is because the cell membrane is an exquisite microcosm of a macrocosm. And what it does is it has an intelligence within the membrane. Of course, we're looking at a sphere versus a flat. But what it has is it has the intelligence that prevents elements from leaving. But it simultaneously has elements that prevent things from coming in. But its ideal purpose is to have this beautiful free flow of information and so on coming in and out of the cell. And then this threshold crossing, the membrane, is where we also position one of the principles that we use, which is the steward leader. So rather than looking at the leader as a hierarchical leader, which is our old models, you know, that the leader is the CEO, sits up here. In Syntropic Enterprise, leadership is held as a space holder, and the intelligence of the cell, anyone who knows cell biology, is that the membrane has some primary purpose, which includes attending to the ecology within the cell, so within the enterprise, while simultaneously being aware of the ecology outside of the cell. And that's not just in the immediate outside of the cell, but that is also in the, if the cell is the cell in the liver of Christine, it is also aware that that liver of Christine is standing right now in the Southern Hemisphere, speaking predominantly to people in the Northern Hemisphere. And so, and my liver is adapting to the environment of which I'm in, entering summer and actually quite warm in the Southern Hemisphere. And then even a larger field, which is the universe, you know, the globe and the universe. So the steward's leader's role is an attenuating intelligence to all of these ecologies, which also defies the current model that we have of leadership, which is this busyness and endlessly squeezed for any opportunity to attenuate or tune to what is happening in the environments. But to circle back to this threshold crossing, what we created in the Trust Manifesto is a set of agreements of how we show up for each other, and how we manage, how the starting point of where we come from, how we manage when things go pear-shaped, which they will, and who makes decisions, and how that whole enterprise works. And it's not a one size fits all, because of course each enterprise has its unique pattern integrity, which is just like a child. Like every child has their own unique pattern integrity. An enterprise has its unique pattern integrity. And so to create an enterprise architecture that holds the shape of that pattern integrity is not a blanket throwing over every enterprise. It is a deep consideration of how we create that architecture. And part of the threshold crossing is that if you are somebody out here who is considering being a participant, an active, and that's the key word, an active participant within this enterprise, then it's not just a skip across the threshold. There's actually some requirement, not only an agreement to this is how we behave with each other, but there is a requirement to invest yourself in a process. And the tool that we use for that, which I referenced earlier, is the tool of Synergistic Accounting, where we get people to nominate and to record what they have the capacity, willingness, and desire to bring to this enterprise in the 6 domains that we cover. And for that bringing, what do they expect in return for bringing what they're giving to us? And we hold that is a mutable document. So it's not something that is fixed, because we want whole people to show up here, people who have lives and children and other passions and other commitments. So if we don't create architecture in which you, as the participant, the active participant within that enterprise, if you suddenly find yourself with a child in emergency, is there a space in the enterprise for you to actually attend with 100% commitment to your child in the emergency? And do we design that into how we create enterprise? And so, but equally, this threshold crossing is self-development, which is really important with any enterprise design, is that we all get to grow up as we engage with the evolutionary purpose for which we're coming together. And so in the process of doing the synergistic audit, people discover that they have one or both. They either have a difficult time naming the value that they have to bring, and they have a difficult time asking for what they expect in return and being truthful about that. And so part of the ongoing engagement for people who are working within a Syntropic enterprise is that they discover that their value could actually be more than they think or less than they think. Their value could be different. They could discover elements that they had neglected to bring into this enterprise. And they also might find that they've undervalued themselves, and they need to actually speak into the value and the value exchange that they're hoping for. So it's a very dynamic conversation that is always alive within a Syntropic enterprise. And of course, most of us, if in audiences I've spoken to, have had experiences where we've bought our value and we've been completely and absolutely unrecognized for that value. And so how do we create an enterprise where individuals' values is an intrinsic part of the architecture of that enterprise's ongoing purpose, and that we create the space where people can show up and can be both grow up and be seen for their value, but also have the value that they're not bringing be reflected back to them. And then how do we create the architecture for that to happen, where people can be then acknowledged in multiple ways, not just financially, but in multiple ways that really honors the contribution that somebody's making. So these are parts of these are just some of the elements of what we use in Syntropic enterprise. And, it's all of the models that we're teaching at the moment are very much practical and have been applied in enterprise with great success. And so this is not an experiment. However, the larger experiment is how do we actually do this and do it and get as many enterprises in the world to become syntropic, because that's what we need. We need to demonstrate that when people like us do things like this is what happens. So rather than trying to change the financial system and the monetary system and the governance system and the legal system from the top end, what we're really doing at Syntropic Enterprise is building the models that says, when we do this, this is what happens to communities, this is what happens to people, this is what happens to the products and services that we create. We're deploying a whole systems thinking around it. And so I am under no illusion that what we're doing is a easy thing. And I am very, very aware that it's going to take probably past my lifetime for this to actually happen. But I also know that if we don't do this, if we don't really focus on the world that we want to create and spend our time and our joy and our heartfelt passion focused on that, the easiness to fall down the rabbit hole of anger and all of the things that are propagated, the polarization and so on that is just increasing in the world, is so easy to do that. But my challenge is to how we actually take this turn and look at the world that we do want to create and be willing to sit in the conversation of how to do that. And so part of what we've done at Syntropic World is we're creating a global community of practice on how to do that, where we share best practices, stories, etc., applying these principles, learning from each other, building the models, demonstrating the enterprises, and then just getting this moving. We've got lawyers now working with how we can consider creating different legal entities, because the limited liability corporation actually, even if you are a B Corp, limited liability corporation, it still has within it the architecture that is animating the current model that we have. And so that's the work of Syntropic. It is truly one of the most amazing bodies of work. I'm so delighted to be a part of it, and part of it with incredible people like Cindy, who is her business planetary is, a representation of the Syntropic enterprise, and so this is the work that we're doing, and it'll take me the rest of my life.